To Georgia next, where pro-EU opposition says the vote has been stolen in this weekend's high-stakes election seen as a choice between Russia and the EU. The pro-Moscow ruling party Georgian Dream claimed outright victory, with the Election Commission saying it had won 54% of the vote. Well, international observers from the OSCE say that the conduct of Saturday's parliamentary election was evidence of democratic backsliding in the country. Well, to discuss, France 24's Andrew Hilliar from the International Affairs Desk joins me now in the studio. Andy, why are the results of this election being contested?
Yeah, well, effectively, that pro-EU, pro-Western opposition coalition has refused to recognise the electoral outcome. One opposition leader calling it a, quote, constitutional coup. Another saying that the election had been stolen from the Georgian people. We've heard from election monitors from the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. They say they've seen evidence of voting irregularities, ballot box stuffing, physical intimidation of opposition voters. Georgian electoral observers also reporting violations, saying that the results don't appear to correspond to the will of the Georgian people. And the other reason more people than expected may have voted for Georgian Dream, which is the ruling party, is perhaps also its campaign strategy. They've been using a lot of hostile pro-Russian rhetoric in the lead up to this vote. And they've been dangling the spectre of Ukraine as well, telling voters that a similar fate could await them if they were to vote for the opposition.
And what does all this mean for the country's hopes of then joining the EU?
I mean, yeah, this vote has been kind of described as a choice between, for Georgia, moving closer to Russia or closer to the EU. The EU has said quite outright that this vote would shape Georgia's future prospects of joining the bloc. Georgia, of course, officially granted candidate status last December. That process frozen by the EU earlier this year for what is called democratic backsliding. Despite that, if you look at the polls, and I'm going to show you one right now, support for EU membership still very strong. And this poll was just carried out in April and May of this year. Almost 50% fully supporting Georgia's membership of the EU. Now, Georgian Dream promised voters in the run-up to this vote that Georgia would still be on course to join the EU if it were to win a parliamentary majority. But the reality is, Georgian Dream has been showing an increasingly pro-Russian stance going to this vote, and the fear is that this vote will push Georgia closer back into Moscow's orbit. Georgian Dream has been fear-mongering, as I mentioned earlier, saying that the country could finish like Ukraine if the opposition wins. And you can see why those fears may be working on the Georgian population. I'll show you another map now. You can see here, Russia's still occupying 20% of Georgian territory after that 2008 five-day war, a war that left very deep scars. And so Georgian Dream really has been playing on the fears on voters' fears of what's happening in Ukraine by scaring voters into backing an increasingly pro-Russian party.
And so then why is Russia so keen to, exert its influence to push its agenda in Georgia?
Well, essentially, Russia wants to use Georgia to push its foreign policy interests and also to increase its soft power at the expense of Western interests, potentially derailing its EU aspirations. So on the one hand, one thing it could do is use Georgia to increase its control over the Black Sea. Of course, that's very important for the war effort in Ukraine. Speaking of Ukraine, another thing that would be important for Russia here is that, if Ukraine's fate did indeed incite people to back Georgian Dream, then that would in a way vindicate Vladimir Putin's policy of carrying out a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, because it means that that's actually pushing his foreign policy interests elsewhere. But I also want to just point out another reason quickly, Jenny, and that's because of Georgia's growing importance as a trade and energy transit hub, particularly since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has pushed European trade with Central Asia and China south through the southern Caucasus region. This has become an essential trade route, alternative trade route in light of Russian sanctions. So you've got major oil and gas pipelines running through here. This is what's known as the Middle Corridor trade route that links Europe to Central Asia and China. Cargo volumes increasing by 65% in early 2023. But what Russian influence in that region could do basically is destabilize trade and energy in that corridor. And of course, that could have big consequences for European trade and energy.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Andrew Hilliar from our International Affairs Desk.